I call this meeting to order at 7:01 p.m. Our chair and vice chair are both unable to be here tonight, so I'm going to act as tonight's chair for the meeting. Tony, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Dossett?
Here.
Ms. Novak? Mr. Shepard?
Here.
Ms. Smith?
Here.
Ms. Stoltz? Ms. Stewart?
Here.
Mr. Zongerl?
Okay, so that's 4, and I declare that we have a quorum. Under changes to the agenda, do I have the Commission's consensus to move item 7, which is old business, to after item 8, which is new business? That'll put the discussion of the revisions of the Historic Preservation Ordinance after the Urbana-Lincoln case. Is that okay with everybody?
Fine.
All right. Then we'll move on into approval of minutes of the April 7th meeting. Are any corrections to the draft minutes?
Move they be approved.
Second.
Okay. Can we vote on that? Do we roll call or just do it? Okay. In favor? All in
Aye.
favor? Opposed? Okay. Pass. Written communications is next. Tonight's meeting, we received a registered preference form from the owner of the property in question, opposing do not support the nomination. Are there any other written communications? No? Okay. And now we're at audience participation. There'll be a time later on the agenda for people to comment on the Urbana-Lincoln case. But if there's anybody that would like to talk about anything at all right now, you may do that. It'll be in a few minutes with the case, when we open the case. Yeah. Carolyn, did you want it? Are you finishing something? Okay, yep.
Carolyn Baxley, I live at 510 West Main, and I'm sorry about my cell phone. It's ringing and I don't know how to turn it off.
It could be a worse ringtone. Yeah.
It must be nothing of any significance. As you can tell, I'm a dinosaur, I'm new to cell phones.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I'm here to speak on behalf of the landmark designation for the Lincoln Hotel. I was actually very disappointed when this case came up a year ago that the property was not designated. I feel that it's one of the most historic properties in Urbana, and you know, my opinion is if we can't landmark this one, what can we landmark? It is critical that we provide some level of local protection for it, even though it's on the National Register. That does not prevent many of the horrible things that could actually befall the hotel, depending on who the new owner is. I also have it on good authority that the current favored, what should I say, front runner for the hotel is backing away from the project. And I will say that it should not enter into your decision about the property. You should judge it purely on the strength of the ordinance, and I can't imagine any property that meets the criteria more carefully or more completely, I should say, than this one. So I do encourage you to please, landmark this property before it falls into the wrong hands and before irreversible changes occur to it down the road. It's very important to the downtown. I own a business in downtown and several properties. And even in its derelict state before it closed, I can tell you that the people were still staying there. They still had an impact on retail and restaurants in the downtown. And it's critical that we find a good owner for it and who will restore it to its, hopefully, its former glory. And, I just can't speak more strongly in favor of a landmark designation than this. Happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you. So we will start the Urbana-Lincoln case relatively quickly. Does anybody else wish to speak now in the audience participation part about anything in, okay.
I'm Malcolm Davis.
Could you fill out that little form there and sign your name to it, please?
My father was the president of the Urbana Hotel Company that built the Urbana-Lincoln. And he owned a grocery store at the northwest corner of Main and Race and had a bakery, baked bread for that store and where the Busey parking lot is. And I've got a picture. I can't find it right now. He put a scaffold up in front of his grocery store, had a thermometer on it, and they raised money to build the hotel, and had a thermometer going up. The more money they got, they reached their goal. And they sold stocks to build the hotel, and I remember all that. And he was secretary of the Urbana School Board, and got the lights put up on the Urbana High School football field. His first field that got night lights. I remember the samples of the different lamp companies that sent to our house sitting around. But my family has quite a history of Urbana. And we knew Joe Royer, the architect. He bought his groceries at my dad's grocery store. So, but I think that is a good thing to have it declared. So I don't know anything else to say about it unless you have questions.
Mary?
I do actually have a question. I don't know if you've read the nomination for landmarking the hotel, but the nominator cited an article in the Urbana Courier that explained that there was a sort of a contest for coming up for a name for the Urbana Lincoln Hotel. And some of the names were the Shakespeare, the Illini, the Metropolitan, the Roosevelt, the Palace, Gray Gables, and so on. And I was just wondering if your father ever told you about that and other names and why they chose the name they did choose.
I don't remember much about those names, but this Lincoln was connected here, you know, and that's the main reason they named it, I think, Urbana Lincoln. So I don't remember any of those discussions. I didn't write very good. I'll put a sticker on here. Okay.
All right,
That
thank you,
it?
Mr. Davis. Yeah,
Thank you.
yep.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
This is my son here, Gail Davis.
okay, and like I said before, we will be having an open discussion about the hotel when we start that case, but if you need to talk right now, you may.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he need to go.
Okay, that's fine, that's fine.
I'm Gail Malcolm Davis, and I live at 708 West Green. We moved in 1944, and my parents owned it, and I bought it about 3 years ago. And both sides of the family have lived on Green Street for 100 years. Both my mother's side, the Buckle side, and my father's side, and in 7 different houses on Green Street. So when I go down to Green Street, I see everybody's house. And so I'm very interested in preserving properties. This is my 6th old house that I've owned and tried to restore it to the original condition. And I worked in Nashville, Tennessee for 25 years, where I was doing a different restoration every 4 years and then move a block and restore that house. So I'm very passionate about preserving what we have, and it's really close to my heart, and I wish you all the success in this endeavor. Any questions? Okay.
And Gail, you signed in, didn't you?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Now, is there anybody else that would like to talk about any topic whatsoever? And if not, we will move on to, well, continued public hearings is the next on the agenda, and there are none. So next is new public hearings. And I'd like to open public hearing on case number HP 2010-L-01, which is 209 South Broadway Avenue, the Urbana Lincoln Hotel. Public hearing for historic landmark application, Brian Adams applicant. I'd also like to mention that this body makes recommendations to the City Council, and the City Council has the final decision-making authority in this matter. For this case, The procedure we'll be following is this. We'll start with staff making a presentation, a summary of the case, and then the applicant, Brian Adams, will have the opportunity to make a statement and present evidence. And opponents of the request will be allowed an opportunity for relevant questioning of the applicant at this point. And then other proponents may be heard, and then the property owner and other opponents of the request may present relevant evidence, and the applicant will be allowed a reasonable opportunity for relevant questioning of any opponents. And next, others who have any relevant information will be heard. And then we'll hear from city staff that can make clarifications or respond to any new evidence. And then the applicant will be able to make a summary of his petition. And then the commissioners can ask questions of everyone. We'll close discussion, entertain a motion from the commissioners. We'll discuss it, have a vote, and close the hearing. So I'd like to start with the staff presentation. Rebecca or Robert?
Hi, this is, again, it's 209 South Broadway, Urbana Lincoln Hotel. Tonight, our task is to hold a public hearing and make a recommendation to the Urbana City Council on the application, either for or against designation as a local historic landmark. The applicant is Brian Adams, and the property owner is Equity Asset Investments, LLC, which is managed by Marine Bank Springfield. At your meeting on April 7th, 2010, the Commission made a preliminary determination that the property qualifies for designation as a local landmark under 5 specific criteria. And essentially, just in summary, there's 2 criteria that deal with history and 3 that deal with architecture and design. The first is that it qualifies under heritage value. The second, under a historic person or event that's significant. Third, architectural type that's valuable for study. Fourth, master architect. And then finally, as a visual landmark for the downtown area. Once that finding was made that it preliminarily qualifies as a local historic landmark, the next step is to set a public hearing, which is tonight at the meeting. And again, tonight, following a public hearing, we'll be making a recommendation to City Council by a majority vote of commissioners holding office. And then, since there is a registered preference form that's been filed by the property owner against designation, in order to be designated by the City Council, it would require a 2/3 majority vote of those holding office. Did I get that right? I believe it's 2/3 majority vote of those holding office. Should the application for local landmark designation be approved by the City Council, the owners would be required to obtain what's called a certificate of appropriateness from the Historic Preservation Commission for future exterior changes of the property, including demolition. And what I mean by future is that it's not a retroactive designation. Once a landmark is designated, then the city doesn't come in and say, okay, you have to change this and this and this. Any future changes are initiated by the property owner, and those changes are reviewed under the Historic Preservation Ordinance in what's called the Secretary of Interior's Standards for Rehabilitation, to make sure that as future changes occur, that they don't take away from the architectural and historic significance of the exterior of the property. Designation also does not include interior changes. There's not an interior designation. It's just on the exterior. We've covered a lot of the history and background of the hotel at our last meeting, and I can also refer you to the staff report, and also the application is covered pretty well in both of those. Again, it's been determined by this body that the property qualifies preliminarily. Although your role tonight is not just to determine whether or not it qualifies, but whether it should be designated an historic landmark. So that's a little bit different question on whether or not it qualifies as a landmark. And so that's our task tonight. There are public policies that the city has already in place concerning the Urbana Lincoln Hotel. The City of Urbana and the Urbana City Council have already adopted public policies that favor revitalization of this property as a key for downtown redevelopment and revitalization. And these public policies include the 2002 Downtown Strategic Plan. And if anyone wants to review copies here tonight, I've got an example, the 2002 Downtown Strategic Plan. Also, the Tax Increment Finance Plan, District Number 1 for downtown, which mentions, well, it more than mentions, it really defines the Urbana Lincoln Hotel as one of the key properties for downtown revitalization, in that it is, again, it's a key property for revitalization of downtown. So it's the property's success has a role to play in the downtown as a whole. And then also the 2005 comprehensive plan as well. And then finally, the City Council's goals for this year includes identification of the hotel as, again, important for downtown redevelopment and its success. So in summary, all of these adopted policies and goals, the city feels like that there's a public stake in the future success of this building and of this property. One issue for consideration in terms of the effective designation would be its effect on the financial viability of the property. Probably one of the key axioms of historic preservation is for a building to be saved, that it has to have a viable use. And inevitably, buildings which don't have a viable long-term use are ones which are lost. So the first key to saving a property is finding a viable use for that property. And it's no secret, I think, by the exhibits that you have before you from the property owner, Marine Bank and Equity Asset LLC, that financially the property's had difficulty. It's gone through hands several times, and if you want details on these financial transactions, you can review the letter that's been submitted as part of the evidence from the property owners. But I would say that the city staff, working with Marine Bank, were putting together a package of incentives to offer to potential buyers and investors in the property. It won't be enough just to purchase property. The property does need substantial investment in order to be a success. The package of incentives for potential buyer would include, we believe it would include significant public investment using tax increment finance money. In fact, the Downtown Tax Increment Finance District Number 1 plan has a placeholder in the plan as a line item for money for revitalization of the property should a potential property owner step forward and ask for city assistance. It should be noted that the development agreement for any sorts of city financial assistance could also include provisions for protection of the building. We feel that that's important as well. Other financial incentives include the Federal Historic Preservation Tax Credit, that's available to the property currently. Right now, the property is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and that means that it qualifies for a 20% tax credit on the cost for rehabilitation, which could be claimed over the next, I believe it's 10 years for future income taxes. And then finally, the city has a program whereby properties that are designated as a local historic landmark, the city does waive future building permit fees. So for a property such as this, if it were designated as a local historic landmark, there would be the advantage of being able to forego what could be thousands or potentially tens of thousands of dollars in building permit fees. So that would be available currently if the property is designated as a local landmark. So your options tonight, following holding a public hearing and considering all testimony, is you can recommend to the City Council that the application be approved. You can recommend that it be denied. The City Council is expected to consider this. Should you make a recommendation tonight, they would be expected to consider it at their May 17th, 2010 meeting. In terms of city staff's recommendation, the city staff concurs that the property qualifies under criteria A, B, C, D, and E of the section 12-5C of the Urbana zoning ordinance. So city staff does recognize that and continues to support landmark designation of the hotel on a technical basis. However, the mayor and city council have given clear direction to staff that reoccupancy of the hotel is a top priority for the city, and that we're currently working with a potential purchaser of the property who's looking to own and operate it as an independent boutique hotel. And we would not like to do anything that would jeopardize future use as a boutique hotel, or any hotel for that matter, obviously. And currently, the person who's looking at purchasing the property needs further evaluation we need to get more feedback on what the effect of designation as a local landmark might mean towards making it, moving it forwards towards that viable use as a boutique hotel. We do anticipate that, again, that a potential purchaser would partner with the city with using tax increment finance monies, and that a potential purchaser would enter into an agreement with the city whereby there could be protections in place. But until the specific needs and concerns of the purchaser are known, we can't yet yield a final recommendation regarding the landmark designation of the property. So therefore, we're recommending that you complete your review and recommendations within the required time period and forward the case to the City Council for further evaluation and a final determination. And we believe at that time, the City Council would be able to consider your recommendation, the public testimony that's given here tonight, the property owner's information and objections in concert with the proposal by the potential purchaser.
Now we have an opportunity for the applicant, Brian Adams, to make a statement and present evidence if you'd like.
My name is Brian Adams. I'm the applicant for the local landmark nomination for the Urbana Lincoln Hotel. I did put together a PowerPoint presentation, which I'd like to go through at this point if I could. I didn't want to just reiterate everything that's in the application because everyone's read that and read it again. But I did want to just sort of touch on some of the points that the current owner of the building brought up in its reply to the application, and use that as a way to sort of illustrate some issues that I think are important or relevant to the significance of this building. So, is it ready to go? Oops.
Do you have a,
Oh, shoot.
do you have a flash drive with-
There we go. That's it. Okay. Forgot my pointer. Okay, so I just wanted to start out with a historic view of the hotel. I believe it's from the 1960s, but it does show you how the hotel looked prior to the construction of Lincoln Square Mall. That would have been the main facade. And then a picture of Joseph Royer that I had come across while doing research, a portrait from a big Elks Club meeting in Urbana, and all of the Elks had their portraits published in the paper, and I believe I found it using the Digital Courier. So that was kind of a surprise because up until this point, 1910, I think all we had was the graduation photo for him. Wait a second. Okay, I just wanted to go through a couple of quick facts about the hotel. We know it was designed, Royer was designated the architect in 1922. It had its initial opening on Homecoming Day in 1923. One of the selling points of the hotel, or one of the issues that was stressed, was that it was a fireproof building built of reinforced steel construction. It was already brought up a little earlier this evening that the name of the hotel was established by a contest in the Urbana Courier where people were to submit names and vote on a name for the hotel. And the feeling of the city at that time was that since the hotel was built on the former location of a hotel that Abraham Lincoln stayed at when he was in Urbana on the circuit, that would be the appropriate name for the hotel, the Urbana Lincoln Hotel. It is built on the site of the Union Hotel, which was also known as Kerr's Tavern. And again, Lincoln stayed there and ate there and would run back and forth from the courthouse to have his lunch. They would bake him muffins and things and run him over to the courthouse. So there was a very close tie between Lincoln and Kerr's Tavern in that particular location in the city. And then finally, it's already been mentioned, but the hotel was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 2006, which I think that's significant because it does demonstrate that on a national level, this hotel was deemed a important historic building. This was just a picture that I took from the Alexander Bowman map of Urbana from 1858. Sorry I didn't bring my pointer with me, but you can see the county courthouse in the center of the slide, and then immediately to the west, you can see Market Street. Just to the left of the T is where Archibald Kerr had his hotel, the Union Hotel, or Kerr's Tavern. So you can see how close it was to the courthouse. So when Lincoln would come to town, he could just run across the street, do his business, or if he wanted a quick bite, he could just run down to Kerr's Tavern there. Two portraits, one taken of Lincoln while he was in Urbana, just to give you an idea of how he looked at the time, very young-looking Lincoln, and a picture of Archibald Kerr, who ran the tavern. They were very good friends. He was also known as Baldy, not because he was bald, because it was a short form of Archibald. But apparently he would play music at night. He played the fiddle very well, and Lincoln always would come by and sit down and talk with him and his family, and they became very close friends while Lincoln spent time in the city. I did want to just address some of the points that are brought up in the bank's letter regarding my nomination, just to sort of clarify some issues that I think they were a little off on. They do make a statement that a large part of the nomination is based on Lincoln's connection with the current Royer Hotel, And I did a quick count of the paragraphs in my nomination, and I could only find 2 paragraphs out of about 25 where I kind of developed the Lincoln connection. And I never meant to state that Abraham Lincoln stayed in the Urbana Lincoln Hotel. That's the second point. As I've said before, the hotel opened in 1923, and we all know that Abraham Lincoln was assassinated on April 14th in 1865. So there was no intention to lead people to believe that, or confuse people that somehow Lincoln was associated with Royer's Hotel. And another point was that they brought up in the letter was that this may be one of the last remaining examples of Royer's work, that was not stated anywhere in the nomination. So I just wanted to make those points clear that those are not quite accurate statements. Just to reiterate, the hotel does have significance at the national level. It was placed on the National Register in 2006. Currently, I've been able to determine about 108 architectural projects which are attributed to Royer in Illinois, Iowa, and Indiana. So he did have a very far reach. It wasn't just in Urbana and in Champaign, but he was very proficient throughout the Midwest, and that's just based on the 108 projects. There are many references in contemporary accounts that Royer had several large contracts in Bloomington, Illinois, Cairo, Illinois, Benton, Illinois, but how many there were, what they were, it's currently unknown. So, I think if we go back to the time when Royer was practicing, we'd probably find that there are a lot more buildings that he designed throughout the Midwest, and I think that emphasizes his proficiency and his skill at more of a national level. I put together some data that I've been collecting over the years. I'm sorry, it's kind of hard to see the print and I don't have my pointer, but this is sort of a graphic presentation of the types of buildings that Royer did. It's based on the 108 buildings that I've been able to, or projects I've been able to pull together. The 2 most common ones are school buildings and residences. After that, commercial buildings such as the Flatiron Building, which burned down, and storefronts. But he also did a wide range of other types of buildings. And one thing which, again, you can't really see it because of the size, is that of all those 108 buildings that we know about, there's only 2 hotels that Royer did, that he designed, that we know of. Both of them are in Urbana, and one of them is the Urbana Lincoln Hotel. So in the wide range of projects that Royer was a part of, hotels are very rare. So I think that's another reason that indicates this is a very unique and significant building. Again, taking that same data and plotting it against the period between 1897, when there's the first indications he was designing buildings, to his death in 1954, it just gives you some sense of when his very productive periods were. And again, that's just based on what we know that he did. Around 1913, there's a big spike in his productivity, kind of a fall off during the years of World War II, and then between 1920 and 1930, he was again very productive, and that's when a lot of his schools were designed, and that's also the period when he did the Urbana Lincoln Hotel. I decided just to emphasize his reach outside of Urbana by plotting some of his more distant projects on this map of the Midwest, sort of centered on Illinois. And you can see that he designed buildings in eastern Iowa, northern and southern Indiana, and as far south as Cairo, Illinois, however you say it. And some of these distances from Urbana are from 800 to almost 300 miles. So again, he wasn't just a local architect. He did have influence and reach outside of the city. And for someone to get projects like that, he had to be well known during his time. People who were working in those communities and wanted a building knew that they could send their or inquire with Royer and his firms about drawing up plans or putting together a project. So again, I think this emphasizes that even though he wasn't a Frank Lloyd Wright, he was important in his time, and clearly he was known outside of Urbana by people who were looking to have a building designed. Sort of to stress this idea that Royer did have a following and was sought out and sought after and known throughout the state and the Midwest. After he completed his courthouse, the Champaign County Courthouse just around the corner here, he was hired to design at least 10 more courthouses and jailhouses in Illinois, some in Indiana, and some in Iowa. And again, word must have been getting out that if you want a courthouse or a jailhouse, Joseph Royer is the person to do it. And so, again, I think this, amongst his peers, he was seen as a competent architect. In 1910, a contingent from Salem, Illinois came to Urbana, and Royer gave them a tour of the Champaign County Courthouse to show them what they could expect, because they were going to hire him to do their courthouse for Marion County, which is just south of Effingham. And apparently they liked what they saw, because if you go down to Salem, Illinois, the Marion County Courthouse, if you look at the cornerstone, it does have Joseph Royer listed as the architect. Schools became a very big line of work for Royer and his firms. Again, he designed at least 32 schools that we know of throughout Illinois. One of the farthest ones to the north is up near Rockford in the community of Freeport, still standing. One of the southernmost ones I found is, I just found a couple weeks ago, is the Effingham High School in Effingham County from 1939. And I thought this building was kind of interesting because Royer's known as a master of period revivals, but this particular building, which is still standing, if you go down to Effingham, you can actually see it from Route 70. This shows that he was also competent with the contemporary styles. I'm not sure exactly how this would be classified, but it's sort of Art Deco, Art Moderne, but it's not looking back to Tudor revival, but it does show that he was competent with the current trends of his time. And then next to that, there's a picture of a business card that I was able to locate, which again shows that they were advertising themselves, Royer and his partners, as school architects. So if you wanted a school, these were the guys to go to, and apparently people throughout the state did. On a more general level, I think that it's important to recognize this as a local landmark, because as it's becoming more and more evident, historic hotels are popular places for people to go. The National Trust for Historic Preservation has a program, the Historic Hotels of America, where they help to keep hotels like the Urbana Lincoln Lodge successful and running. They have several programs that owners of the hotels can participate in to make them successful, because there are a lot of people out there that do prefer to stay in a hotel like this as opposed to a Super 8 or a Econo Lodge on the highway. And these are just some examples of hotels that were probably in worse shape than the Lincoln Lodge is right now, the Urbana Lincoln Hotel is right now. This particular example is from Selma, Alabama, where this hotel was built in 1837, and it sat vacant for over 100 years, but it has been restored, and it's now a very successful and popular place to stay for tourists when they visit Selma, Alabama. Another hotel roughly contemporary with, or pretty built actually the same year as Royer's Hotel, is this hotel in St. Petersburg, Florida. Again, it had the same situation where initially it was a very popular resort, but it fell on hard times. It sat vacant for 20 years, but it's been successfully turned around and is now a popular destination for tourists who prefer to stay in historic hotels. And then finally, I thought this example was especially pertinent for the Royer's Hotel. This is a hotel that's in Pennsylvania on a college campus. And it caters to people who come to the university or the college for events, who prefer to stay in a historic hotel that's sort of centrally located. This was built 1931, shortly after Royers Hotel in Urbana was built. So I think it's a good example that shows how a hotel like this, in a setting like this, can be made to work. And then finally, last couple of points is preserving old buildings like the Urbana Lincoln Hotel is good for the environment. A lot of the current literature and preservation journals stress how it can be environmentally friendly to keep the old buildings up to date, and rather than tear them down or totally redesign them, but using what's there and accentuating there is something that's a very positive thing. And so finally, I just would stress that I'm very passionate about my feelings about the hotel. I think it should be determined a local landmark, and thank you for your time.
Not a question, but just one comment. And I know you've heard it before, but I wanted to thank you for definitely what is the best application nomination that I've seen in my tenure on the commission. Very well documented, very thorough, and this PowerPoint was also very helpful. So I thank you for all the effort that you put into the nomination.
Thank you.
I'll also give opponents an opportunity for relevant questioning of the applicant right now, if you'd like, but it can come later. Okay. Are there other proponents of the nomination who would like to speak now? Karen Coomer.
My name is Karen Coomer, and I'm come here tonight as the author of the National Register for Historic Places nomination for the Lincoln Square Mall and the historic Urbana Lincoln Hotel. The nomination was successfully submitted and accepted by the Department of the Interior in 2006, as has already been stated. And it was also listed for its national significance. And I think that's an important point that needs to be stressed, that normally 95% of National Register nominations are forwarded to the Park Service, generally for local significance, rarely statewide significance. Very, very few are ever designated on a national level. They go through a lot more important review and significance. And thus I think it is important that the Urbana Lincoln Hotel, in conjunction with Lincoln Square Mall, was designated as on the national level for its significance. I think it needs also to be stressed that the designation as a local landmark really only affects the exterior of the Lincoln Hotel. Most of the redevelopment of this hotel, when it does occur, I think will be taking place in the interior, because as we all know, the guest rooms and the bathrooms, the lobbies, the public spaces, the dining rooms, the conference center, and most importantly, probably the mechanical systems are all going to be the major emphasis of this work. That's where the redevelopment, that's where most of the expense is going to be taken. Anyone who is going to undertake this project more or less is going to leave the exterior as it was, because that is the appeal of this building. It's a historic hotel. It is what will draw people, as in the instance of the boutique owner of the boutique hotel, is the quaintness, the historic significance, the historic architecture. They're going to want to preserve that, not make radical changes. At least one would hope so. So I don't really see that this designation, which again will affect only the exterior, is really going to have much effect on the economic redevelopment of this hotel. And it's already been stated also that there's the federal 20% tax credits are available, which is one of the reasons why Lincoln Square Mall and the hotel were initially listed on the National Register. And it should be noted that Lincoln Square Mall has already successfully completed a multi-million-dollar tax credit project, taking his 20% tax credits in an equity partnership with another major banking institution. Unfortunately, not Marine Bank, but another major financial institution has become partners with the owner of the Lincoln Square Mall. And they've invested multiple millions of dollars in this project. So I think it's very easy to see that this could also happen with Lincoln Square Mall. And I think it will be part of the economic development package that the city should be giving to potential owners, along with the bank, that they need to investigate this tax credit situation. Since these two buildings are co-joined in the National Register nomination because they are integrally actually one building, any work that is done in the hotel will actually affect Lincoln Square Mall and the work that's already been done there. So local landmark designation will not only protect the historic Urbana Lincoln Hotel, but it will also protect Lincoln Square Mall and the or the millions of dollars of work that's already been taken on this hotel, or on this mall. And so I think it's important to realize that the local designation is the only way really to protect this ensemble group as a whole. So I would urge you to locally designate the mall and help preserve its protection for future generations. Thank you.
Anyone else who would like to speak in favor of the motion, of the nomination? Okay. Next, representative of the property owner will have a chance to present relevant evidence. So,
good evening, Commission members. I'm Dan Lanterman. I'd like to go through a few things. I apologize for not having a PowerPoint display. I want to start with some tie-ins to the city staff's comments. As all you commission members know, this is the second meeting. The first meeting was, could the building qualify? And this is what I'd like to call, and it's a word that the city staff used, the second meeting in the ultimate three-step process is what I think can be described as the should. You voted in April that it could meet the qualifications. Now you're to make a recommendation to the Urbana City Council on whether that should whether the building should be landmarked. And I submit respectfully that the answer to that is no. And I'd like to tick off some points about more recent ownership to dovetail to some extent with the original ownership that has been discussed tonight. Marine Bank is a forced owner of this hotel who has lost in excess of $400,000, in addition to the possibility of an additional loss if this property can't be sold for $1.1 million, which is what it's listed for with a hotel broker, Cress Hotel Brokers from Cape Girardeau, Missouri. In addition, the bank is in the business of lending money. There's $1.1 million sitting at 209 South Broadway that isn't part of the bank's lending base, and that deprives the community. And although we have a branch on the wrong side of the street, so to speak, we have a branch in Champaign. We are a bank that has been in this community for about 5 years, and we have we started out with rented space and then built a full-service branch for the community. And we have lenders, home lenders, commercial lenders, and then, of course, account services and the like. The bank is in the business of lending money and making money off interest. By not being able to lend on the value of the hotel, in addition to loan losses of, as I said, $400,000 so far, and perhaps ultimately more, the bank has lost the chance to earn interest. In addition, the bank incurs expenses. We have a management company that watches over the hotel. It's a local firm, Green Street. I believe, I'm remiss for not bringing the property tax bills, but perhaps city staff can help me. I think the bank's paying about $40,000 a year in real estate taxes on the vacant, non-income producing building. So that's the present ownership situation. Secondly, and everybody has a different perspective. We've all heard the examples of the glass being half full to some people and the glass being half empty to others. And clearly, there's a group of people who you've heard from that is absolutely passionate about preserving this hotel. And their feelings are sincere. But this is the other part of the glass, so to speak. This is the current ownership who doesn't want to own it, didn't volunteer to own it. And as an aside, because of the passion of the supporters, I think there's an effort to gloss over the reality that, yes, as city staff mentions, it's the last commercial building in this block, because the rest of the block was torn down, presumably with the blessing of the Urbana City Council, to make way for what was then the second indoor mall. And I was at that mall in the 60s with my mom and my little brother. I mean, that was a big deal. And I'm sure the Urbana city leaders were very proud of it. So everybody wants to just ignore the fact that there's been a 1960s mall slapped on to Mr. Royer's 1920s hotel. And it's just not important. And I think that that is important. Furthermore, Urbana has been very active in preserving its downtown. Just to the north of the hotel is a modern, with a nice brick facade, parking ramp. Because I know that a lot of downtowns hear complaints, well, you don't have enough parking. We'd come and shop downtown. We'd go to the restaurants. We'd go to the boutiques. We'd go to stores if just there was more parking. And I'm not sure of the date of development of that. I don't know whether what was there before, but I assume it was an older building, and a decision was made that there was a greater good to be had to go a block south, take out some buildings, and develop parking for Main Street. And I think that's a great government decision. But nobody's touched on that. Then the addition in the 80s, the hotel's got, I think, 130, 128 rooms, something like that. The addition roughly doubled the original size. It's 69 rooms, I believe. And it's not full Tudor style revival, and the city staff made note that there was an attempt to imitate it, but It was not full Joseph Royer level work, and that gets glossed over. What you've really got is a Royer in the middle, sandwiched between two modern structures. And I don't want to make anything personal, but I never said in anything I wrote that the applicant said that this was the last remaining example of Royer buildings. I just said that the argument cannot be made that this is the last remaining example. I can see very clearly, based upon the passion for Mr. Royer's work, that if this were the last remaining example, I suspect that maybe this meeting would have to be moved over to Lincoln Square for the capacity crowd it might generate in preserving it. And so that was my point, that it's been sandwiched in the middle of modern structures, and it's not the last remaining example. There's all kinds of Royers in the Royer district, and I haven't heard that each and every one of those have been landmarked. For whatever reason, this one has been picked out for landmarking. And something, I mean, obviously, you know, Mr. Royer is gone. Neither side can really speak for what he would want. But I found it very interesting in the PowerPoint display when the frame came up of the very modern-looking high school in Effingham, the 1939 a high school that it surprised me was built in 1939. I mean, it certainly looked like a much newer building to my untrained architectural eye than that. So perhaps Mr. Royer would agree that having a 60s mall on one side of his hotel, having an addition, having a parking ramp across the street, it's all not so bad. And perhaps he wouldn't, if he were here, have demanded a historic landmark. Now, I implore the commission to read the city staff report carefully, and it ticks off the prominence of this property in economic development and its development. Its development role was recognized as early as '02. The last historic application was in '08, 6 years after that, and then that was denied in '08. And then after that, 2 years later, the only thing that's changed is that the hotel is closed. That owner did not make it into the boutique hotel or the hotel with a national flag that everybody would love to see in downtown Urbana, and rightfully so. And the second thing that has changed is then now the city has come back again in 2010 and made this goal 4 of its 2010 plan. So once again, this is the should hearing, and I submit that the commission should not ignore the fact that the Urbana City Council denied the 2008 application, and that ought to be given some respect and some deference rather than brushing it aside. As I've said, the bank does not want to be a long-term owner of this property. The bank wants any and every potential buyer to come forward. And in the hotel business, there's, I guess, a couple schools of thought, if I can use that phrase here in the home of the State University. There are some operators that feel that the national brands are the way to go. That they've got to build up customer base. People, as they travel, they'll stay in the same brand of hotel, and they want a flag. And the former owner indicated that could affect the ability, historical landmark could affect the ability to get a national flag. But although I talked about national flags in a lot of what I wrote, I don't want to leave out the independent boutique, the national flags. Presumably, they offer the benefit of a higher revenue stream to the hotel owner, but they're not free. You have to pay fees, so there is the other school of hotel operators that say they want to be standalone or independent or their own mini chain and have their own niche properties. The University of Illinois student body is diverse. The parents of the student body are diverse. The faculty is diverse. It would be wonderful if an independent hotel operator came along to make this a international, world, cosmopolitan, cutting-edge sort of hotel. I guess the new is wearing off Starwood's W chain, and the Holiday Inn's got Indigo. Those things were boutique-y hotels, but part of a chain. It'd be great if somebody could come in and create their own little boutique or affinity group, be it people related to the university, whether people related to the different ethnic backgrounds represented at U of I campus, what have you. As we've heard, in the early days of the hotel, the community got in behind the hotel, sold stock, raised money to build it in essence as a community hotel. I don't know what happened. Maybe it's a change in American culture, but what I think is a hotel that people that have university business should want to go to. Now, as others mentioned, maybe it's the Super 8 or the other newer hotels that have sprung up around campus, some on University and Urbana, some down in that southwest corner of Champaign. In order for this property, as city staff says, to remain historic, it's got to be viable. And so it comes into a tough hotel market. And to try and tie and shrink the market of people willing to buy this hotel, I think, is not something that landmarking should do. That would work contrary to the goal of financial viability being what saves hotels, not a landmark designation. And if there comes a time where there's a developer who sits down and negotiates a development agreement that's got cash benefits, and the city, I heard say, will make every effort to negotiate landmark status, that's the place to do that. There's comments about this will just affect the exterior and not the interior, but although the local landmark may just affect the exterior, and I don't know, ever pretend to know the Department of Interior guidelines frontwards and backwards, but I think you may find that they have some interior impact. When you take that tax deduction, you take that whole set of standards, and those standards may come inside. One more thing, and again, I don't want to make this personal, but nowhere in what I wrote did I say any applicant said Abraham Lincoln stayed in this hotel. I said very clearly that obviously before his death, it was stated that Abraham Lincoln had a connection with the tavern, hotel, inn, whatever the proper term is for the time, that was on that property. Whatever happens on that property, Abraham Lincoln's 1800s connection will always live on in that block, whatever is in that block, because according to the application, that block was frequented by the esteemed President Lincoln. And I'm from Springfield, so we understand a little bit about Lincoln shrines. The PowerPoint display. I hope that the University of Illinois someday has something like the Nittany Lion Inn. When I attended law school, I had a law school roommate for all 3 years that was a Penn State grad. He bleeds Penn State blue, and my other roommate was a Michigan grad, and so we had two Big Teners, and then at that time Penn State was independent, and now he's in the Big Ten fold, which we find ironic. But there's a lot. I've never been to the Penn State campus, but I think it has a lot of similarities to the U of I campus and the U of I community. Pardon? Oh, yeah, college town. And those other two examples, one set vacant 100 years, one set vacant 20 years. So if you put that together, that'd be 120. On average, they set vacant 60 years. I don't know whether the city of Urbana can afford to let the hotel stand vacant for 20 years, much less 60 years, much less 100 years, chasing a dream that could be killed by a landmarks designation standard before a new owner is found. In conclusion, I want to say that the commission members' vote involves very weighty and solemn matter that has serious consequences and serious financial ramifications for the owner and the city of Urbana and its economic development. And before you vote, I would suggest that you ask yourself, would you, or since this is a should hearing, should you take those financial risks? Would you take those financial risks with your property and the surrounding area if you owned it, if it was vacant, if you were trying to sell it? If your chance of selling it might be limited, if the buyer's chance of getting a hotel flag and being part of a national chain would be diminished, if your buyers, be they strong independent owners with a grand vision for the grandeur that everybody in this room would like that hotel to have for the city of Urbana, the U of I campus, but would the independent operator's vision be killed by increased cost, exterior or interior? If a new owner does the bean counting and finds that the credits warrant doing the deal, that's great. But if you landmark it, you're forcing that on a potential buyer. And most people, when they buy something, want to have the freedom, which is why you buy something, to do what they want with it. There should be a clean slate, a blank canvas for the new owner to fill in and paint and add value to the community. So I would ask that you can, I would ask you to consider that as you cast your votes. This is just not the right time or the place to recommend landmark designation. The only baggage that should come with this hotel is the baggage that new guests of the new owner bring to the hotel. The hotel should not, the hotel and its new owner, if we can find one, should not be saddled with the baggage that comes with the landmark designation. A landmark designation now, while the hotel is closed and for sale, is, I think, somewhat akin to a slight twist on the all dressed up and nowhere, or in this case, no new owner to go, so to speak. And so I would ask that you recommend to the City Council that, as they voted in 2008, changes that have occurred since 2008 have not undone the circumstances that led Urbana to vote to deny the application. Thank you. If anybody has any questions, I'd... All right.
Well, just a second. Mary?
Thank you, Mr. Lanneman, for your thorough presentation. You alluded to a statement made by Karen Coomer about redeveloping the property involving primarily the interior of the hotel, which is unaffected by local landmarking. And you made a statement that you weren't sure that it was only the exterior that was, and I just want to make, first of all, before I ask my question, I want to make it very clear that what we're talking about here in our local ordinance is it involves only the exterior.
Yeah, okay. And that's the way I understand. That's the way I understand your
okay.
ordinance. My point, and if I didn't make it effectively, I apologize. Shame on me. But the federal tax credit, it's my understanding that those Department of Interior standards, if you and anybody who's owned that hotel since '06, by it having being on the national list, if they wanted to make renovations in accordance with the Department of Interior standards, they could get their 20% credit spread out over 10 years, presumably. But I don't think those standards, although the Urbana ordinance may be exterior only,
right, and
Commissioner Stewart, I don't think that when you go yes. Hunting for tax credits, or you take a tax credit, that you can say, I just want to take it for my outside work. I think when you take the first dime of tax credits, it may permeate the whole building.
But
the
of course,
interior renovations and
understand.
trying to bring these 1920s bathrooms up to what a 2010 bathroom should look like according to the typical hotel guest.
No, thank you for that clarification. But of course, we are just talking about our ordinance tonight. And so I wanted to ask you then, in light of that, what specific exterior changes that your consultants have recommended need to be made would be prohibited by landmarking? What specifically do you think a hotel owner would like to change in the exterior of the structure?
Well,
that they
let me say two things, and I want to say both things very, very respectfully. First off, we don't have any consultant recommendations. We've put it on the market as is, where is, and whoever wants to buy, they can do their own due diligence. We are not suggesting how buyers should handle their purchase. We just want to go to a closing with a buyer. Secondly, and I don't know this, and maybe somebody on city staff could address this, I wonder if that 1980s edition that added almost 70 rooms and doubled the size of the hotel and only imitates the Royer style could have got approval to come out of the ground. And if it hadn't, maybe the hotel would have folded in the 80s. And presumably Mr. Jumer, who had some success in Central Illinois hotels, knew what he was doing when he added his addition, and presumably he did it not necessarily to be ahead of the market on what 1980s guests wanted, but he was catching up with the market. The guests wanted an indoor pool if they're going to pay their $100 a night or whatever the rate is. They want to be able to swim in the winter. The ballroom, to try and make it a community centerpiece. The rooms themselves, and then I think some conference rooms were also part of that addition. I don't know if that would have flown, Commissioner Stewart. Yeah. No.
That anybody has suggested need to be made that would be prohibited.
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are there any other opponents of the nomination who'd like to speak?
My name is Carl Hill. I live at 1913 Trails Drive here in Urbana. I'm a developer. I am also a real estate broker. I'm a builder. I'm coming in just from the standpoint of observing a few things. I've talked with various people in the community, the owners, the city people, and other interested people just in the area about Jumer's, about the historic Lincoln. So I just want to offer a couple of observations from my standpoint, and if it has a good or bad effect, then we'll see tonight. One observation is that the owners of the property should have a strong stand on what they want to do with that property. They should have a strong voice on what happens with that property. And he has indicated basically, as representative of the owner, that now is not the right time. And I don't think there's any discussion as far as whether the property qualifies under what we see here in this booklet, maybe except for the economic standpoint. If we do not find a developer for it soon, we're going to have a lot of problems. And here's where this idea of the perception of reality, or there's a perception and there's also a reality. Me, as a developer or builder, I see a perception. If I see that people of the community are willing to work with me and want to help me to get my project done, and being an entrepreneur, I am by nature optimistic. I think I have some ideas. I think I have some things that will work. I want to try them. But I need to know that somebody's behind me, and especially the people that make decisions. I want to know that there's not another level of bureaucracy that I have to deal with, something that might impede my progress in getting my project done. We don't know what's going to happen with this particular building. There are people that like to see it stay as it is on the outside, but we don't know what will make it work, what's going to be viable. Apparently, the community at large does not see its previous glory, how it was. They don't, or maybe they just don't appreciate it. But I just want to strongly impress upon you that it's very important that our developer sees that we are behind them in getting something accomplished. What it is, we don't know, but we want to get something done with that building. It needs our support. And I think right now the timing is not good for this designation. So if we can wait for the actual owner to come and say, okay, I'm ready, this is what I want to do, and ready for this designation, then we should strongly look at their desires for it and try to support them with it. That's all. Any questions? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you. Are there any other opponents who'd like to speak? Is there anybody who's neither an opponent or a proponent who would like to have something to say? Just add a few words about anything? Okay. Well, I think I'd like to ask the staff if they have any clarifications or want to respond to any new evidence we've heard.
I'll just make one clarification about the vote required tonight and then also at the city council level. Tonight is a majority of the commissioners holding office, so it would need to be a unanimous vote tonight. And then at the city council level, it's a super majority, so it's 2/3 of the alderpersons then holding office.
Okay. We could give the applicant, Ryan, if you you'd like to present a summary or anything else you'd like to say? Okay.
Yeah, I just had just a couple of comments in regard to Mr. Lanterman's discussion. I apologize if I misrepresented some of his statements in his letter. In one case, the last remaining example line in reference to that might be the last remaining example of Royer's work, it was in quotation marks, so I interpreted that to mean that he was quoting me directly out of the nomination. So I clearly misunderstood that, but I just wanted to make that clear that I understand that and I appreciate that, it was a misunderstanding on my part. I guess I just want to reiterate that local landmark status, really, it's already been discussed a little bit here, but would not really impact what could be done to the interior of the hotel. Again, it would only impact what could be done to the exterior. And I think that's, given the history of the building and the significance of the architect, that's not asking for a whole lot, that we give to the community some assurance that we will provide some level of protection to the building without jeopardizing any future use of the building. So it's sort of a trade-off, and I just can't imagine what anybody, a potential buyer, might find problematic with that, because unless they had some very strange idea of possibly stuccoing the whole building or completely altering the look of the exterior, I just don't see where that would be objectionable. That's just my personal point of view. I think a lot of concern about this building stems also from the fact that even though Royer was very productive throughout the Midwest, he did do a lot of buildings here in Champaign-Urbana, but we've also lost a lot of his buildings right here in downtown. We lost the theater to fire, we lost the Flatiron building to fire, the country club just up by the Woodlawn Cemetery. Royer designed that country club, and his wife did the murals that used to be painted on the interior. We lost that original building to fire. The county jail that used to stand next to the courthouse was designed by Royer. That was razed several years ago. So I think that's why there's so much concern and so much interest in following what happens to these buildings in this community. And I can understand the economical aspects and the bottom line issues that have to be dealt with. But again, with local landmark status, really what's at issue is maintaining the exterior look of the building, and I just don't understand how that can be seen as a stumbling block. Maybe it's part of the city's task to make that clear to whoever has an interest in acquiring the hotel, to make that very clear that we want you to come in, we want you to make this a viable building, but we do ask that you just adhere to these few relatively minor guidelines. And the examples that I took from the Historic Hotels of America, I didn't mean to imply that we should let it sit for 100 years if that's what it takes to preserve it. All I meant to demonstrate with those examples was that here were hotels that were facing the same challenges that we have with the Urbana Hotel here. They stood vacant for decades, but that didn't impact the ability to come back and to make them successful. That was the point I was trying to make, not that somehow this building could sit here for 100 years before somebody comes in and do something. So I just wanted to, again, make it clear why I brought those examples up.
Thank you. Mr. Lanterman, anything else to add?
Oh.
I just want to give you a chance.
Very briefly. Maybe I'll kind of go to one of Mr. Adams' last point about the restrictions being minor. Like everything, minor. all comes down to the eyes of the beholder. And if Marine Bank is successful in getting somebody to write a check for $1.1 million to buy this property, they might not feel that the restrictions that have been attached to the property are minor, and they may not come to that closing table. In fact, they may find that a major stumbling block. And of course, when a sale doesn't happen, you never know why it didn't happen. And so there is no smoking gun. You know, secondly, and I guess this is maybe more philosophical, if you will, I've yet to hear of any groundswell of support in the community here. The hotel was built with community support. The U of I campus is a few blocks away. Mr. Adams, my understanding, he's a professor in the anthropology department. I haven't heard about any buzz at the University of Illinois about jumping in and trying to partner. There was a reference to Lincoln Square partnering up with a bank that's not Marine Bank. I haven't heard about anybody at the U of I coming forward to partner up with the city of Urbana. In Springfield, we've got a house called the Elijah Isles House. It was a wooden framed house south of downtown. Terrible condition, needed to be torn down. It was taken off the foundation. It was jacked up. It was moved closer to the Lincoln's home area on a donated lot. And then just painstaking renovation, absolutely painstaking. And I can't remember the name of the group. I made a contribution or two to it because a friend of mine was active in it. The Elijah Isles House Foundation, if you will. So there are things that different communities do. Halfway between here and my house in Springfield is Decatur. When that Decatur Old Holiday Inn went into foreclosure, the city of Decatur was petrified about what would happen, and they stepped up and they bought it. And they ran it for a while until they could find the right buyer who'd sign the right agreement, and then they turned it over. Under this application, the bank bears all the burden, and nobody else. That's all I have.
Does anybody on the commission want to question anybody one last time while we've got, okay, out there? Well, I'd like to close the public comment portion of the case and move on to discussion of a motion. And if anybody has a motion they'd like to make, this would be the appropriate time.
I want to thank everybody for making their comments for and against. However, and with due respect, the way I read the ordinance that guides the actions of this commission, most of what we've heard tonight, although it augmented what we already knew, really provides me with no new information. And frankly, I'm a little bit confused by staff's presentation in the context of city actions related to redevelopment of the property or the financial information that we've been given, or the idea that there was a financial concern here, because I don't see that as at all pertinent in the context of the ordinance. And I've been reading the ordinance over as we've had this discussion, and nowhere in the ordinance does it state that we are to be an advocate for a bank or a financial concern, or frankly, for the community development interests of the city of Urbana. Our job as people interested in historic preservation are to use a, I think, narrowly defined and fairly rigorous set of criteria to put our stamp on our community. And so I want us to talk about that, but I do have a motion that I can read and we can discuss when the commissioners feel like, it's time for that, so.
I'd like to second Scott's concern about the purview of the commission. In fact, I know I've been told in the past that I cannot consider any factors outside the provisions of the ordinance in making my determination. And so this is kind of 180 degrees from that. So I think that's a little confusing for me, but I'm going to go with the ordinance and sort of the established practice of the commission, which is not to consider extraneous factors as I consider my vote. We are the Historic Preservation Commission, not the Economic Development Commission, and that is the purview of the council. We make a recommendation on, I think, fairly narrow grounds, and that's been our practice, and that's how I intend to proceed. We certainly have a lot more context in consideration of other issues, but I will add to that I've heard a lot of speculation and assertions about how landmarking would inhibit the development of the Urbana Lincoln Hotel, but I've not heard any specific reasons why it would, or specific examples of why it would, just that we're in this bad economic climate. And I think it's clear that the difficulty of the hotel in recent years certainly is not due to the fact that it's landmarked locally, because it hasn't been, and yet it has had a lot of difficulty. So I don't think you can then draw any conclusions about how its redevelopment would be hindered by local landmarking without, in the absence of specific evidence. So that's kind of my my response to that extraneous factor that, in fact, I'm not going to consider in voting.
If someone is interested in making a motion, we could, be discussing the merits of passing one, I think, and if
Sure.
Yeah.
I've got one.
Okay.
And I worked on this today and edited as needed here during the conversation. So this is the motion. Pursuant to Historic Preservation Case number HP 2010-L-01, the Historic Preservation Commission recommends the Urbana City Council approve the historic landmark nomination for the Urbana Lincoln Hotel located at 2009 South Broadway Avenue. Considerations include, number one, Section 7-F-5, point F, point 2 of the Urbana zoning ordinance. Okay, that section of the Urbana zoning ordinance, which provides the city the authority to designate local landmarks and historic districts with the stated purpose to promote the educational, cultural, economic, and general welfare of the community. Consideration 2, the City of Urbana on February the 16th, 2010 received a complete application to designate the property, so identified as a local landmark. 3, the property owner sent a letter of opposition to the nomination on April the 5th. 4, on April 7, 2010, this commission made a preliminary determination that the subject property qualified for designation as a local landmark under criteria A, B, C, D, and E of the Urbana zoning ordinance, section 12-5.C. On April the 23rd, 2010, the property owner sent a revised letter of opposition, and that the criteria for designation of a landmark A, this is really sort of the meat, I think, of the commission's position. The Urbana Lincoln Hotel has significant value as part of the architectural, civic, cultural, economic, political, and social heritage of the community. The hotel has been a downtown landmark since its opening in 1924. Additionally, the building is listed on the National Register of Historic Places based on its architectural and commercial significance. Being a prominent building in the heart of the city, it has been considered architecturally significant throughout its history. Point 8, criteria for designation of landmark B. The Urbana Lincoln Hotel is associated with important people in national, state, and local history. The hotel was designed by Joseph W. Royer, prominent local attorney, and you might say regional architect. The hotel is also a symbolic link to Abraham Lincoln's tenure as a lawyer in Urbana. Criteria for designation of a landmark C. The Urbana Lincoln Hotel is representative of the distinguishing characteristics of the Tudor Revival architectural style, inherently valuable for the study of a period-style craftsmanship and method of construction, and retains sufficient integrity to well convey a sense of time and place. The architectural style is one of the period revival styles popular in the late 19th and 20th centuries. Later changes have not appreciably inhibited the public's ability to perceive the property's historic character, and the property retains a significant degree of integrity. Criteria for designation of a landmark D. The Urbana Lincoln Hotel is a notable work of a master architect whose individual genius has influenced an area. The hotel was designed by Joseph William Royer, Urbana's most prominent architect. Local buildings designed by Royer include the courthouse, the high school, the free library, and the post office. The city of Urbana recently created the Joseph W. Royer Arts and Architectural District to commemorate his historic and architectural heritage. Moreover, 2 of the city's historic landmarks are Royer buildings, and the city has a Royer Historic District. 11, criteria for designation of landmark E. And perhaps one of the strongest, the Urbana Lincoln Hotel is an identifiable and familiar visual feature in the community owing to its physical characteristics and its unique location in the heart of downtown Urbana. In addition, we note that the hotel is not a particularly fine or unique example of a utilitarian structure. The hotel is not known to be located in an area that has yielded or may be likely to yield information important in history or prehistory. And third, in their 2010 City Council goals, the Urbana City Council identified restoring the property as a viable hotel and conference center while respecting its historic character as an important strategy for creating a vibrant, innovative downtown. And the reference is the 2010 City Council goals, Goal 4, Strategy F, page 4. That's the end of my motion.
Did you, I could see it there. Did you jump from 5? Did you mention 6 when you were reading that all?
No, I didn't. 6 is the property located at 2009 South Broadway Avenue and known as the Urbana Lincoln Hotel, was constructed in 1923 in the Tudor Revival architectural style.
Right.
Thank you. I've got this written down, Tony.
For Tony? Okay.
So in summary, the motion goes through, the historic and personal attributes that staff pointed out when Robert talked to us before.
Mary? We need a second for that motion to go anywhere, if you're interested.
I'll second the motion.
Okay. All right, thanks. Discussion of that motion. You've kind of had your say, I think. Would you like to say anything more? No? Yeah. Kim, you have any thoughts? Okay. All right. As we've been going along tonight, I've been just wondering to myself if anything would have been different here if the landmark status had been set 2 years ago, and if we'd still be at the same spot we are tonight as far as the development of the hotel. And it's just a question, but we'll never know. But the fact that it didn't get landmarked 2 years ago doesn't seem to have been a savior for the development of the building or spurred anything to happen. And I'm not convinced that landmarking it, going ahead and landmarking it, is going to do damage to the possibility of developing the building. So I believe I'm going to support the motion myself. Anybody have anything else to know? Tony, would you poll us?
Mr. Dossett?
Yes.
Mr. Shepherd?
Yes.
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
And Ms. Stewart.
Yes.
Okay, the motion passed unanimously, and I will close the public hearing at this point and repeat that this will come before the City Council on May 17th. Is that correct? I think I heard that before.
May 17th.
May
right.
17th.
Mhm.
Okay. All right.
Can I ask a question about that, Robert? At least in the HPC ordinance, there is no time clock that's running on the council. That's one of the reasons, besides being kind of confused by the fiscal stuff. I didn't, frankly, take it very seriously, because it seems to me as if the council has got the ability to defer this, with notification long enough for any kind of agreements between potential buyers or this package to get worked out. Are you certain that May the 17th will be the day that the council will try to take a vote on this?
The the ordinance does state that once you've made your recommendation, it will go forward to the next city council meeting. So it will go forward. That doesn't mean they have to make a decision on May 17th, but they will consider it on that date.
Thank you.
Sure.
I think 2 years ago, I learned after the city council voted against landmarking that the minutes of the commission's deliberations actually hadn't gone forward to the council, just the vote. And I wanted to make sure
The minutes
that
are
the
part of.
minutes will be part of.
They
Okay.
will be. Yeah,
Great,
they go
thank you.
forward with the packet that goes to the city council.
Well, next on our agenda would be our old business, which is the draft revisions to Article 12 of the Historic Preservation Ordinance of this, Historic Preservation section of the Urbana Zoning Ordinance. Staff like to report?
Yes, just one moment.
Go ahead.
So we discussed at the last Historic Preservation Commission meeting, we discussed a draft revision to Article 12 of the Urbana Zoning Ordinance, the article that deals with historic preservation. And so we went through the the proposed changes and gave the reasons for making those changes. And then we had a discussion, and the commission had some recommendations for us to go back and make a few revisions, which we did. They're listed there in the memo accompanying the revised draft. So the revised draft, as we discussed at the last meeting, does have underlines and strikeouts for any changes from what you saw at the last meeting. So those are not changes from the original ordinance, the existing ordinance that we have now, but just from the last meeting. And so there were some changes to the definition. Chairwoman Novak asked that we add back in the definition for building, because the National Register does distinguish between building and structure, and so we added that back in. Then we discussed some changes to the definitions for certificate of appropriateness, certificate of economic hardship, and undertaking. And if you look at in the draft ordinance on page 2, you'll see the language there that we removed. So a certificate, we'll start with the certificate of appropriateness. It's a certificate approving plans for alteration, and it used to be relocation, construction, removal, or demolition of either a designated landmark or structure within a designated historic district. And it was pointed out that before that, the definition for alteration includes all of that, and so that we could just remove relocation, construction, removal, or demolition, and just use a certificate approving plans for alteration. So we went through and made that change. Our legal counsel preferred that we included the in parentheses as defined herein, so that people would then know to go and look for the definition of alteration to get that fuller definition. So we made that change in all of those definitions. Then we discussed the definition for relocation, which included significant events, and it was pointed out that a significant event, if it happened there, it couldn't be relocated. So we removed that. Then on page 10 in the section on historic districts, it was pointed out both for historic districts and landmarks that as we were adding in a clause that when a landmark or a district is designated, that it be recorded with the Champaign County Recorder of Deeds, that if there's an alteration or if a landmark designation is rescinded, that too should be recorded so that would also follow with the property deeds. And so we made both of those changes, added that requirement in. And then the section for certificates of appropriateness and economic hardship on page 15. It was suggested that we include language to avoid substituting distinctive materials in addition to removing them. And so we made that change. And then in the tables, table 12-1 and table 12-2, we discussed that there were actually two categories that dealt with replacement of roofing materials with like roofing materials, and that it called for different levels of review in each of those two different the categories of each of those. And so we removed one of those. It was a duplicate and it was inconsistent. And so we removed the first one in each of the tables, which was the one with no review as the requirement, and left the one, as we discussed, that required administrative review. A couple of other issues that came up during the discussion. Someone suggested that because when a property or properties are nominated for landmark or district designation, that it's very important that we do contact the property owner. And so someone suggested that the notification be made by certified mail instead of by first-class mail. And so in discussing that with our legal counsel, they prefer that we continue to use first-class mail because there are actually some problems with certified mail. One is that it does add a burden onto the property owner that they have to go and get it. You know, rarely does someone come to your door when you're actually there and just give you the certified mail. Generally, you get left a note and you have to go pick it up at the post office, which is only open during working hours, and it's very inconvenient for people to get it, and often they're just not picked up. And so there's often a negative connotation about certified mail that would mean that once you got one of those notes, you would purposefully not go and get it because you thought, oh, well, that's bad news, I'll just avoid it. And so we would be less likely to actually get the letter to the property owner if we use certified mail. Our legal counsel also informed me that there is a legal presumption that first-class mail will be delivered. That does stand up in court, that if you mail it first class, there is a presumption that it will be delivered. So he also got me the legal statute that explained that. I didn't bring it this evening, but I can get you a copy if you'd like. And then we discussed whether or not in the section regarding public hearings for landmark nominations, where it says that the property owner may request a continuation of the public hearing. So that's about, we're proposing that instead of having a preliminary determination and then a public hearing at a separate meeting, that those be combined into one public hearing and there be one decision made. And so one of the commissioners asked if language should be included to state that the Historic Preservation Commission itself had the right to ask for a continuation. And I had mentioned that was in the bylaws. And so I did bring a copy of that. It is in the bylaws. It does explain that the commission may, let's see. Under the section that deals with the procedure for public hearings, it's Article 6 of your bylaws, and on page 4, number 18, it says the commission may continue any case due to insufficient information provided by the petitioner in order for city staff to make a recommendation or the commission to make a decision. The commission may also continue any case for the purpose of gathering more testimony or due to the absence of the petitioner at the meeting. So you do have the right to make that, and so we don't need to include that in the ordinance because it's dealt with in the bylaws. And then in the section on the appeals process, there is a clause stating that once an appeal has been filed, that work allowed by approval of a certificate of appropriateness or economic hardship shall be stayed until the appeal is decided. And we discussed at the last meeting, someone mentioned that the word stayed is unclear, and we discussed other words that we could use in that. And I did discuss that with legal counsel, and they said that is the correct legal term, and they would prefer if we leave it as is. So I did discuss whether or not we could add the word frozen in parentheses afterwards, and they would be okay with that. There was some discussion that that could make the matter more confusing. And generally, the city staff is the one that that administrates that part of the ordinance, and we know what the word stayed means. So we could explain to a property owner if they question that. So we thought that leaving it as stayed would be okay. So those were the changes that were made, and so tonight, if you have any other discussion of other points, if you've read through the ordinance again and have other suggestions and so on, we can discuss those. But the recommendation would be that the commission forward the proposed, the revised draft with a recommendation of approval to the Urbana Plan Commission of the proposed text amendments outlined in the staff memo for today, as well as the staff memo dated March 31st, 2010. Entertain any questions?
Thank you for going back to legal for some of those and doing the wordsmithing and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty happy with what we have here, so.
Sure, Kim.
Under appurtenances, I kind of think of that as a relationship between two things. Could that also be like a landscaped area, or, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be an object? Or is that?
Appurtenances, where are you looking at that?
I'm just
In the
looking under the
definition?
definitions.
The definition.
Yes, where you're giving,
Mm-hmm.
here you're talking about objects, but I think it also can be, you know, a landscape area that is with, you know, has a strong relation with the structure or building.
Yeah. Typically in real estate, it's things that are bolted down on the property that you're not going to be taking with you. And to give an example, for a landmark example, you sometimes run into this very issue. That is, does the Landmark Commission review, say, large planters? Well, it could depend. Is it movable? Is it temporary? Or does it really belong to the property? And I think that's what they're trying to get at under appurtenances. If it's something that's, I mean, no one wants to review, flower pots, obviously, that on someone's front porch, but there are some types of buildings where those, say, concrete urns are integral with the property. They're bolted down, they go with the property on a, permanently. And so that's what I think of as appurtenances.
Now that we're on that, I mean, does it really say in this definition that it's bolted down things? I mean, when you look at statues, I mean, statues don't necessarily, it could be just some little statue that you could carry away and put a different one up tomorrow or something. Should we be more clear about what this is? Or is it that important?
I could look to the National Register and see if they have a definition that might help us clarify. If that would be useful.
Sure. Yeah, that would be fine. Yeah, I keep going back to the definition, that word, in terms of real estate. Because sales contracts always refer to appurtenances. When someone sells their property and leaves, how much can they take with them? You know, they can take the blinds, but they can't take the whatever that should be going with the property. And those
So it's-
whatever's out on the property, away from the house, a lot of times are referred to as appurtenances.
So our little question about that, is that going to hold us up for a month? Or are we going to pass what we have here and come back and look at appurtenances in a separate little change? Or what would that do you think?
Yeah, I
Well,
think we could.
I know, but we should
I
get.
think we could move forward with it, and I can look up, try and get a more defined definition from the National Register or from somewhere that, and then if you had an objection to it, so it would be in the Plan Commission draft, a note that you had recommended that we revise that definition, and then I could send that to you, and you could, answer me individually, not as a commission, because we can't have that type of discussion not in the public, but you could then send me your comments that I could then give to the Plan Commission. So I think you could go ahead and vote on it with the proviso that we will look at the definition for appurtenances, if that suits.
Suit me. Yeah. Does anyone in the audience like to weigh in on this? No? Okay. Just checking. Any other discussion of anything else?
One other little question.
Okay.
So when you go to this little chart, so site changes and new construction, this is under the level of review for contributing properties. So buildings that are under 100 square foot are exempt from that. Okay. I didn't realize that.
Buildings, according to the zoning ordinance, buildings under 100 square feet, accessory buildings under 100 square feet, do not require a building permit. And so they also, I'm not positive on this, but I don't believe they need to be affixed to the ground in the same way that something over 100 square feet would be. And so we thought, they're basically sheds that are easily removable. And so were not included.
Yeah, and that, on that chart, if you look below, they're differentiating between those small accessory buildings, which should be considered new construction or site changes, versus demolition, removal, relocation of buildings that are less than 100 square feet. In other words, if you had a small historic, what would be less than 100 square feet? Okay. Potting shed, it's let's just say it's 100 years old. It's less than 100 square feet. Well, under this, they would need to get approval in order to relocate that or demolish it or whatever. But if it's something that's new and that's less than 100 square feet, we don't require a building permit. We do have setback requirements. It's not, there's not foundation requirements. It's required to be tied down to the ground, but with no specific criteria for doing that. So we created that that cutoff as a way not to be overly burdensome on property owners when they want to do just what should have minimal to no effect on historic property, so that they can continue to use it without too much burden.
Well, do we have a motion to forward this recommendation of approval?
So moved.
With, do we need to have a little provision for the appurtenance?
The clarification.
Clarification.
On the definition for
Yep.
appurtenances.
Okay. Amended to say that.
There we go.
Is anybody interested in seconding that motion?
Second.
Scott? Well, let's have a roll call then.
Mr. Dossett?
Yes.
Mr. Shepherd?
Yes.
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
And Ms. Stewart?
Yes.
Okay.
Go to Planning Commission.
And where's my agenda?
I did have one,
Okay.
one quick comment.
All right.
About the packet. I was really happy after reading probably hundreds of pages of her text. Rebecca has a typo in your memorandum page. In your memorandum page, the first paragraph, I think that says strikeouts.
Oh, really?
That's written through,
Oh, yeah.
and should be strikeouts. I just wanted to point to
Maybe
that.
spell checker doesn't
It didn't find.
check strikeouts. All right.
She struck out, strikeouts.
So next on the agenda is monitoring of historic properties. Does anyone have anything to discuss there? I don't. Staff report.
I have something. Quite good news, really. We received on April 18th, 2010, an award, a heritage award from the Preservation and Conservation Association for the workshop at 303 West High Street that removed the aluminum siding and of the house, and which was later restored. The award was given to the property owner, the Community Development Department at the city, and to the Urbanic Historic Preservation Commission. So here's the award. This way. There's the award, and we will be framing one. We actually have 3 copies of this. One is for the Cronins, and another we will frame and put in our lobby. And I'm not sure if you have any ideas what you'd like to do with the Commission's one. If you can think of an appropriate place to put it, then just let me know, and I'll put it, yeah, right in front of the city.
There.
Probably should be in possession of the chair, right? I mean, give it to
Sure, we
Alice.
could give it to Alice. We also, it was not a project that we specifically worked on, but also awarded that evening was a Heritage Award for the reconstruction of the arch at Buena Vista Court.
Yeah.
So, and we did review that here, and we, city staff actually worked with the owners of the bungalows, trying to bring them together to work on the arch as a historic district. And so they did restore it. It's not quite finished. They still have to finish the roofing materials, but I do know that they were hoping to have it done before the awards ceremony and didn't get to it. But they do have plans to finish it. So they received an award as well.
I just had a thought about that award, that who, among the commission or commission support staff, hardest on that house unveiling, and just thinking of Rebecca, maybe Rebecca should have that.
No, I think the chair should. I
You
can look
do?
at the one in the office here,
Okay,
but thank
all
you.
right, okay. Anything else to report from? Yep.
Well, Rebecca definitely worked hardest on the staff, worked really hard on the house unveiling. I thought that our discussion about the ordinance, I thought I would tell this little story. I've told Rebecca this before. But in terms of notification of property owners and using certified mail, the first community I worked at, St. Charles, Missouri, when I started working there, we had 2 historic districts, and then 5 years later, I think we had 7 or 8. But the first district that was enacted, there was, I think, about 200 properties that were in that district in the nomination. And between the time when I started and the time for that first big new nomination, we sat down to write the ordinance, and a city council member said, I'm tired of hearing people say, I never knew that this historic district was being enacted. I don't want to ever hear that again. So what we're going to do is every step of the way, We're going to give people a certified letter, and we're going to make it so that they receive a certified letter to tell them every step what's happening. So that way we'll have proof, and no one will be able to never be able to say, well, it turns out there was 6 steps in that landmark process, and there was over 200 properties. And what happened was it turned into such a hornet's nest because people got so upset that they had to go to the post office to collect these series of letters, and they would spend their lunchtime sitting in their post office just fuming. And the post office said they actually had to hire a temporary postal carrier to deliver all of these letters and to get all of these signatures. And so what was well intended, in the end, it was not practical. So I would suggest, we're recommending here to go with regular first-class mail. I think that is the way to go, especially when you get into larger districts, because you don't want the process to be at issue. You want the facts of the case to be at issue. I mean, the process should be, everyone agrees on them, and it should be totally transparent, of course, but it also should be not burdensome for people. So in that case, the process was became the issue, and so I just thought I'd throw that out in hindsight. First-class mail is just fine.
We have no study session. It brings us to announcements. I want to wish everybody a happy Preservation Month, National Preservation Month. And the theme of this month is Old is the New Green, which I saw on the magazine cover there. Yep. And, yeah. So anyway, happy Preservation Month, everybody. Any other announcements from anybody?
Move to adjourn?
Oh, my gosh, we're there. Do I hear a second?
Second.
I'm in favor of it. Aye? Aye. All right, we're adjourned.